All right, let's talk about the Florida State Seminoles here for a little bit. Obviously, this team is coming off a disastrous season. We're focusing on the future, but we can't ignore reality. But when you look at what's going on in Florida State, they are sliding under the radar. And I think we're about to see a massive leap that a lot of people aren't paying attention to out of Tallahassee. And we got some great data to back this up. But first, I'm Nick. That is Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Florida State Seminoles are trying to turn a page on just what was, like I said, a disastrous season last year, making a lot of great strides. Excited what we're seeing at the quarterback position. The freshmen on campus right now are off to a great start. This is a more, I'll say, mature, more humble group, the people that have stuck around. This is going to be a much more cohesive locker room. But when you look at the talent overall, in terms of what Florida State has done, we know the recruiting has been outstanding, generally speaking. But what they've done in the transfer portal is actually slid under the radar. So there's actually, if you look at the world of college football over the past 3 years, there are two programs that have dominated the transfer portal, at least when you look at the data and when you look at the just going what's discussed in the media. That's the University of Oregon. Ducks have done a phenomenal job. They've been a great team. And the Miami Hurricanes. They've done a phenomenal job. Give credit where credit is due. I know a lot of you FSU guys don't want to hear this, but give credit where credit is due. They've done a great job in the transfer portal department. But when you look at what Florida State has done over the past 3 years, they're basically at the same level. In fact, let's pull up this chart here to discuss what I'm talking about. Now, look, you're going to see some lines on this chart. It's maybe a little confusing, but this is just the transfer scores comparing Oregon in blue, Miami in red, and Florida State, and what I could get closest to Garnet that I could find in Microsoft Excel, highlighting their transfer scores each of the past 3 seasons. And what you can see as the lines kind of dash around from season to season, that Florida State is doing basically better than Miami. You can see, except for 2025, they're above, and overall, they're a little bit better and pretty close to Oregon, right? So a lot of people, if you listen to the media, say Oregon crushing it in the transfer portal. They're doing great, undeniably so. Miami doing well too. Florida State is right with them each of the past 3 seasons, and this includes 2025, this past transfer portal class after a disastrous 2024. So Florida State, Mike Norvell have done a great job building a roster through the transfer portal, supplementing the roster compared to the best programs in college football when it comes to using the transfer portal. Now, when we talk about the Florida State future, here's where it gets interesting. Let's go ahead and go to our next graph here. This is kind of what I'm talking about. So I added Colorado and LSU to Oregon and Miami because there are two other programs that rely heavily on the transfer portal. And if you look at their trailing 3 years transfer score, which I kind of mentioned on the previous slide, and you compare their wins. So the transfer score 3 years combined is in blue, the bar graph. The 2024 wins are in red. And you can see Oregon, Miami, Colorado, LSU winning a lot of games, right? Florida State last year did not. You can see what happened with FSU. That's an aberration. That's an anomaly, right? A statistical anomaly. One of the things you may be familiar with the phrase regression towards the mean, right? You'll have an anomaly, but eventually over time you'll regress towards the mean. The mean in this case is if you do well in the transfer portal, you win games, right? That's what the data suggests. Oregon, Miami, Colorado, LSU winning anywhere from 13 to 9 games, winning games, bowl games, good bowl games, ranked teams. The aberration, the anomaly was Florida State last year. We talk about regression towards the mean. How about progression towards the mean? Florida State progressing from a disastrous 2-win campaign all the way up to, I think, at least 8, 9, maybe even double-digit wins. Who knows? Maybe even more than that for the 2025 season. This is important to focus on, Seminoles fans. What you saw last year looked absolutely bonkers because statistically it was, right? It didn't make any sense. It just, everything fell apart. That's what happens when you get some of these weird anomalous kind of seasons. But if you look at the data and compare what Florida State is doing and still doing at a high level, like I mentioned on the previous slide, they're still crushing in the transfer game compared to every other team that does well in the transfer portal. We should see a massive spike in wins for Florida State in 2025. A lot of factors go into it. I understand, right? This doesn't guarantee the wins, but if you look at just what every team has done in the transfer portal that's used it well, only one team was terrible last year, Florida State. Every other team wins a lot of games. I think that trend will reverse for Florida State as they progress and regress, however you want to call it, towards the mean and go back to winning a lot of football games. All right, Miles, I'm curious your thoughts on all of this. But first, Florida State fans, in the comment section below. I threw a lot of data at you, a lot of numbers. I can't help it. Big Microsoft Excel channel. But to that end, we're going to talk wins here for a second. Give us your prediction for how many wins Florida State will get in the 2025 season. This can obviously go a bunch of different ways. You can win 8 games, win a bowl game, it's 9 wins. Or maybe you go to the college football playoff ACC championship game, you could get 12, 13, 14 before it's all said and done. Give us your prediction for the number of wins Florida State will have for the 2025 season based on what you've seen so far from this offseason, and put your prediction in the comment section below. But Miles, over to you now. What are your thoughts on just this data and everything going on with Florida State?
Yeah, Nick, like you said, there's a lot of data and it's hard to digest at times for people. So I'm gonna keep it simple. I think when you look at what Florida State has done, and I think the transfer grades, the quality of the players, everything like that, that's more important. But a more simple way of looking at it, if you just look at their ranks straight across the board, I think something stands out. You look at 2023. This is a team. Their transfer portal rank for that season was 6th in college football. Pretty good. Top 10. Number 6, that's good. 2024, not much deviation. They're 7th. They're really good, but we all know what happened that season. This past season, really big drop in performance. A lot of people thinking, is there still winning culture at Florida State? Or is this team going to be able to bounce back and do things? Well, I don't think people actually were thinking that. I think that was just kind of media. I think, like you said, it was an aberration because, boom, 6th again in the 2025 transfer portal class. They didn't really lose the hearts and minds of the transfers wanting to come to Florida State. This is a team that, has done good things in the past. Just because you have one down year because of some anomalous way things that rolled out. This is a team that's still really talented, and there's a lot of good recruits. And I love that you use the trailing 3 years transfer score because that's a key year. Over the trailing 3 years, there's a lot of good talent on this roster. They've been recruiting and getting transfer portal guys for the last 3 years at a high level. That didn't just go away last year. There's an anomaly, like you said. Things didn't fall their way. You look at one score games and things like that, like wondering, okay, if people go back, how many one plays, if this play went this way, does this team win this game? That's the kind of season that Florida State had. It didn't go their way a lot of the time. They lost a lot of games because of it. So this is Florida State. There's still so much talent, and you got to look over the last 3 years, like your chart shows. This team is still very talented. This team can still bring it back, and I think when you look at the numbers, as far as their rankings and transfer portal grades and their recruiting grades, this team still has a lot of really good stuff. So I think the chart you brought up as showing wins versus transfer portal grades, that's the key here. Is I see it almost like a team like Colorado, where when Deion Sanders came there for the first time, I think they were like 1-10 or 0 whatever. They weren't really good at all that season. They flipped it around the very next season. That team did a lot of great stuff and got it over. I think they got like 4 or 5 wins that year. Going from 0 to 4 or 5 wins, that's a pretty big difference. I see Florida State going, like you said, from very low to about 2 wins to I'd say 10. I'd say at least double-digit wins. I think this is a team that has the talent to be very, very good. I like Castellano, the transfer quarterback that came in. I think he's going to do a lot of good stuff for this team. We already did a video about him, breaking down our thoughts on him, so go check that out. But overall, Florida State's in a really good position. I think if you look at the numbers, you look at the transfer portal, the guys that got in, you look at the recruits, this team overall is in really good shape. And I think, like you said, competing with the Oregons, competing with the Miamis, that shows what kind of caliber competition you are with. And Florida State is a much, much, much better team than last year's performance showed. So regress to the mean. I think that, probably 10 to me, 10, 11 win season for Florida State. They come back. I think we're going to see a huge difference this season. And I think the Seminoles are going to get things back on track.
Yeah, and while the recruiting has taken a slight dip after last season, it wasn't a disastrous. They're still a top 20 recruiting class for 2025. So even though they're recruiting, anytime you have a bad season, that's just going to happen, especially as bad as that was. That's just the truth, reality of the situation. But the recruiting didn't fall off a cliff, and that's really important to focus on too, because one of the things that can happen is you enter this negative flywheel in the recruiting basis where you have a bad recruiting class, and then you get a little bit worse, and then you get another bad recruiting class, and it just becomes just negative feedback that just destroys the program. As disastrous as it was for 2025. And remember, in state, the Gators finished strong. The Miami Hurricanes, they're very good at recruiting, very good at transfers. They were a successful program last year, even though they just missed out on the college football playoff. Both those programs are in solid position. So it's a very tough end state, obviously, in Florida. And despite that, recruiting didn't totally collapse, right? Norvell and his team held the line with the top 20 class, according to 24/7 Sports. Again, not what you expect out of Tallahassee. We're expecting top 10, top 8, top 5. But the reality is the wheels didn't completely fall off. They held the line, had a solid class together while doing a great job in the transfer portal. As Mark Norvell tries to get this thing retooled and trending in the right direction, it was, to me, my opinion, all about stability. Can they prevent the total collapse? And they did that this offseason. And when you look at the transfer numbers, they actually excelled. And that's why I think we're going to have a very strong chance for that regression or progression, if you want to be positive about it, towards the mean this upcoming season, like you brought up, getting up to maybe 10 wins. Because this is a team that still has talent. They are a top 25, top 20, top 15 program from a recruiting talent basis, and they're one of the best top 2, top 3 from a transfer basis. If you put those things together, you don't get 2 wins like you saw last season. You get closer to double digit like you brought up. And I think that's where Florida State is trending this season. Quarterback position is a big reason why. We talked about it at the time. You can't win when you're bad at QB. I think they're going to be a lot better this season. You brought up the transfer. We'll obviously have to see how that all shakes out, but I think they're going to be a massive improvement from what we saw on the field last year for the Seminoles. Overall, again, just focusing on the data, just trying to put opinions aside, right? And trying, just not rely on our gut feelings, but just look at the numbers. It's very clear what happened last season was such a catastrophic anomaly, right? It's not a new trend. They held the line in recruiting. They're doing well in transfers. 2024 was a disaster, but it was weird, right? It just, based on the data, it was weird. If you look at the numbers and look at what they're doing with the transfer portal, the recruiting class, the talent on campus right now, this Florida State Seminoles program is still trending in a very positive direction.